For 3,000 years, the ancient Egyptians poured everything they had into one of the most ambitious projects in human history. But here's the thing. It wasn't about building cities for the living. It was about engineering a victory over death itself. They were building for eternity, and this is the story of how they did it, written in stone.
I mean, just look at this. The sheer scale, the incredible ambition. When you see something like Abu Simbel, you're not just looking at a temple. No, you're seeing a declaration of permanence, literally carved into the face of the earth. This wasn't just about architecture. This was a cosmic mission to make sure that what they built would last forever.
Now, they might not make it millions of years, but they did manage to create buildings that will outlast our IKEA furniture by about 4,000 years, which is pretty good. So you have to ask yourself, what does it say about a culture when their greatest ambition is to build something that lasts forever? So you have to ask, how does a civilization even come up with a project like that? Well, to understand it, you have to start with where they lived. It all comes down to their unique landscape, the Nile Valley, which pretty much shaped their entire understanding of life, death, and the universe. Okay, this slide basically maps out the entire Egyptian worldview. On one side, you've got the Black Land, this narrow, fertile strip right along the Nile. This was the place of life, of seasons, of constant change. But right up against it was the Red Land, the vast, endless desert. It was hot, sterile, and it never, ever changed. So naturally, it became the perfect place for the dead, a realm of pure permanence. This duality wasn't just geography, it was the absolute core of their belief system. And who was the client for all of this incredible building? Well, it was a little something called the Ka. You can think of the Ka as a person's eternal life force, their spiritual double. The Egyptians believed that after you died, your Ka lived on, but it had needs. It needed a physical home, like a mummy or a statue. And it needed a permanent, safe house, totally stocked with food, drink, and furniture for the afterlife. So every single tomb, every pyramid, was basically a house for eternity, built for the Ka.
All right, so with that in mind, let's get to the moment it all clicks into place. This is the moment they go from digging simple graves to creating something the world had never, ever seen before. This was a revolution in permanence. So on the left, you see what the earliest royal tombs looked like. They were basically just brick-lined pits in the ground. I mean, they did the job, but they were pretty vulnerable to grave robbers and, time. But then, around 2668 BCE, a pharaoh named Zoser and his genius architect, Imhotep, they make this incredible leap. They decide to build not just a tomb, but an entire simulated world for the pharaoh's Ka. And here's the key, to build it all out of the most permanent material they could find, stone. And this plan just shows you the insane scale of their ambition. This isn't just one building, it's a model of the entire Egyptian state, frozen in time. Inside these massive walls, there were dummy palaces, government offices, and ceremonial courts. All of it was solid stone, totally useless for the living, but perfectly functional for the Ka, who could now eternally perform the rituals of being king.
Zoser's complex was just an explosion of brand new ideas. I mean, this was the first time in history stone was used on such a massive scale. That huge wall, it wasn't just for security, it was a symbolic barrier separating the perfect, orderly world inside from all the chaos outside. They invented stone columns, carving them to look like the bundled reed and papyrus plants from the Nile, linking this stone world back to the living one. And of course, right at the center, the step pyramid, a literal giant stone staircase for the pharaoh's soul to climb up to the heaven.
And this detail is just incredible. In this tiny, dark chamber, they placed Zoser's life-size statue so it could gaze out through two little holes. Why? So his Ka could watch the rituals being performed in his honor forever. It's a little eerie, for sure, but it's what makes these massive stone structures feel so deeply personal. Zoser's complex didn't just close a chapter, it kicked off a full-blown architectural space race. It sparked this century-long obsession with refining that staircase to heaven into its most perfect, pure form, the true pyramid. The bent pyramid is basically what a panic attack looks like in stone. The plan was for this massive, super steep, 150-meter-tall monument, but partway through, the ground actually started to give way. So, the architects had to make a tough call. Drastically change the angle from about 54 degrees to a much safer 43. It's the architectural version of a full-blown midlife crisis, a sudden, very obvious change of direction. And all those hard-earned lessons from Snefru's engineers, well, they paved the way for this, the Giza Plateau.
This is it, the culmination, the moment when the technology, the resources, and the belief all came together to create the most iconic structures in human history.
I love this stuff. Their tools were so simple but so clever. Okay, so if you need a perfect right angle for the base of a pyramid, what do? You take a rope, tie 12 knots in it at equal distances, and then you form it into a triangle with sides of 3, 4, and 5 units. Boom, a perfect right angle. That's the Pythagorean theorem, like 2,000 years before Pythagoras was even born.
To really wrap your head around the leap from Sneffer's work to the wonder of Giza, you just have to think about the numbers. And there's one number in particular that is just mind-bending.
2.3 million. That is the estimated number of individual stone blocks used to build the Great Pyramid of Khufu, and each one of those blocks weighed an average of 2.5 tons. This wasn't just a building, it was arguably the largest single project in the ancient world, a logistical masterpiece designed to create one perfect geometric mountain of stone.
And watching over this whole city of the dead, this massive necropolis, is this incredible monument, the Great Sphinx. I mean, it was carved around 2530 BC, making it the oldest monumental sculpture we know of in Egypt. It's this mythical creature, the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh.
But here's what's just mind-blowing. The scale of it. 73.5 meters long. To put that in perspective, that's longer than 6 school buses lined up end to end. And remember, this was carved from a single piece of bedrock. It's just a colossal undertaking.
So what was all that incredible effort for? It was for this. Deep inside that unimaginable mass of stone is the king's chamber. It's a vault made of solid red granite, sealed up and hidden away from the world. The entire pyramid, all 6 million tons of it, serves a single purpose, to be the ultimate, impenetrable safe deposit box for one man's soul on his journey to the afterlife.
And this just shows you the contrast perfectly. Over here, you have the perfection of Giza, and on the other side, the crumbling ruins of what's called the Black Pyramid. This one's from the later Middle Kingdom, built almost 1,000 years after Giza. It's such a stark reminder of just how challenging these projects really were.
So what happened? Well, the pharaoh, Amenemhat III, actually had to abandon this pyramid at a place called Dashur. The reason? Catastrophic structural problems. The whole thing literally started to crack and sink under its own massive weight. It's an amazing story because it shows that even these master builders were pushing the absolute limits of what was possible with their technology. Now, after the age of the pyramids, Egyptian society started to change. And as it changed, the focus of their massive architectural projects shifted dramatically. They went from building sealed houses for the dead to building open houses for the living gods.
So this is the big pivot. In the Old Kingdom, architecture was introverted, secret, and all about one single person's ka. But in the New Kingdom, religion became a much more public affair. The focus shifted to these sprawling temples, designed not to be sealed away, but to host huge public festivals and processions that involved thousands and thousands of people.
And there is no better example of this than Karnak. This place wasn't just a single building. It was a religious city that just kept growing and expanding for centuries. Pharaoh after pharaoh added their own gateways, halls, and shrines. It was like the Vatican of its day. And its grand avenues were built to handle enormous public events, like the Opet Festival, where the statues of the gods were carried in a huge parade from Karnak all the way to the nearby Luxor temple.
Can you imagine stepping inside Karnak's great hypostyle hall? It must have been an absolutely overwhelming experience, and it was designed to be. You're suddenly standing in a dense forest of 134 colossal columns, packed so tightly together that they just dwarf you, making you feel tiny and insignificant in the presence of the gods.
And the architectural genius here is how they created that feeling. See, the central columns are taller than the ones on the side, which lets them put in these high windows called clerestory windows. These let in just enough light to pierce the darkness, creating these dramatic shafts of light in the gloom. It's not about lighting the place up, it's about creating a mysterious, shadowy, divine atmosphere. It is architecture as pure emotional engineering.
Well, here's the punchline. The only light in the hall came from these small windows way up at the ceiling, which means down on the floor, the columns were deep in shadow. Those detailed carvings were almost completely unreadable to any human visitors. And that was the whole point. They went to all that trouble to write a history book and then basically turned out the lights. because the audience they cared about wasn't us, it was the gods. So, and this is the really crucial point, none of this was just for decoration. Every single element of an Egyptian temple was part of a symbolic language. It was their way of building a model of the entire cosmos out of stone.
And they had a consistent toolkit they used everywhere. The massive pylon gateways, those weren't just entrances. They symbolized the mountains on either side of the Nile where the sun rose and set. The columns, they weren't just holding up the roof. They were giant stone versions of papyrus and lotus plants, symbols of life itself. Those dense hypostyle halls evoked the primeval marsh where all life began at the dawn of creation. And the whole thing was organized along a powerful central path that led you on a journey from the chaotic world outside, deeper and deeper into the sacred, orderly home of the god.
When you look at the stark, timeless power of a space like this one, Khafre's Valley Temple, you have to wonder. For 3,000 years, the Egyptians dedicated their absolute best efforts to building a story of permanence, a bridge to eternity. Their architecture was their answer to that fundamental question of what lasts. And, it makes you think, in our own age of steel and glass, what story are we building? And what will it say about us in 1,000 years?